Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caraval, and I'm here again with Bob Laliberte. Bob, you're a regular on ZKast now.
Yeah, it certainly seems like that. It's great to be here. Thanks, ZS.
Yeah. Before we get started, though, I just want to give a quick shout out to eWeek. All ZKasts are done in partnership with the eWeek eSpeaks program. We're going to be talking about Mobile World Congress. Now, Bob, you didn't attend, but you did monitor a lot of the news virtually. I was on the ground. So I think together we can make this nice combination of, what you saw and what I saw. Obviously, it's the largest, network show in the industry. In fact, I don't think they call it actually Mobile World Congress. I think it's officially MWC because there's so much wireline stuff there now, right? So
yeah, exactly.
One of the good things about the show, though, is I think there's a definite secular trend towards network monetization. I think if you look, there's been a lot of talk in our industry about all the layoffs and things like that have happened lately. But if you look at the financial results of all the network companies we cover, they've all been pretty good, right? So it does seem like businesses and telcos are spending money on network upgrades, and that's good for everybody in the ecosystem we cover. One of the interesting themes, though, and I talked to a fellow analyst about this that I kind of ran into in one of the halls, he was making a comment that if you had come to Mobile World Congress 5 years ago and showed up this year, from a telco transformation standpoint, you might not notice a lot of difference because it's a theme, it seems, telco cloud, telco transformation we've been talking about for, the greater part of a decade now. And it doesn't really seem like we've advanced the ball forward here. Now, I want to be, friendly to the telcos here because I've picked on them in the past, and these are big networks with a lot of sunken costs, and you can't just, flip a dime like that. But the fact remains, this promise of new revenue generating services still has yet to really manifest itself. We come up with a lot of theoretical ideas, but we haven't really got there yet. So what are your thoughts? Is telco transformation real right now or not?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the telco environments have traditionally always trailed the enterprise and their agility and what they've deployed and the modernization aspects of it. So it's not really surprising to hear that. But I think if you look at a lot of the announcements that have happened over the last couple of years, and especially what was even at this year's conference, when you see the things about, I think it was like Swisscom and AWS or whatever that was, right, hosting their entire core in the cloud, that's certainly a transformation, right? That's certainly a modernization of the environments, right? When I was in the telco world about just 5-6 years ago, everyone was still on hardware appliances. So the fact that we've disaggregated and gone to software, went to virtual, and now we're getting into more of the cloud aspects of it, I think there's a significant transition taking place with 5G that organizations are looking for. Is it fully there yet? Like Open RAN is a great idea to disaggregate the antennas, but in the radios, but is that fully baked yet? No. But it's moving forward. So I think these telcos are really looking for ways that they can modernize. They're looking to leverage the cloud. They're leveraged to look at cloud native type deployments, right? Disaggregating the control and user planes and things like that. So there's a lot going on. But like you said, these are massive environments. So making this transition is going to take time. But I think organizations are making a pretty good effort at modernizing.
The problem is some of the things you brought up add to the complexity of an already complex environment, right? When I talk to AWS, so they I don't know if you saw the announcement, but part of their Mobile World Congress announcement 2 weeks ago, they announced a fully turnkey managed service to help with telco transformation.
Yeah.
Right. And when I talked to them, they said they're a little surprised that the shift of telco infrastructure to the cloud hasn't happened faster. And so they roll out the managed service in order to simplify that. But in conjunction with that, Juniper has had their own O-RAN stack now. When I talked to their CEO, Rami Rahim, about this, he said they would never have been able to play in the RAN space before, but now that it's moved to software, they can. So it's created a more fragmented environment. And in fact, if you look at a lot of the announcements for Mobile World Congress, NTT partnering with Cisco, IBM partnering with Juniper, right? The AWS managed service, these are things that are designed to try and take this extra complexity that we've added and then, move it more to kind of a managed environment to allow, this transformation to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's typically the case, right? As you become disaggregated, as you want to become more agile, the complexity increases. And we've seen that just in the enterprise, right? As more people have gone to the cloud and distributed environments, the complexity increases. So if you want to have that highly agile, disaggregated environment where you can pick and choose and go to highly virtualized or containerized or cloud-like where you can scale, there's going to be potentially some more complexity, which then drives the impetus on either those managed services or the management tools. And in particular, I think what we're also seeing is a significant shift for these 5G solutions. And as they become more deployed and they're much more complicated, the need for AI ML solutions to support those and back those up, because we've probably gotten out of that realm of the human ability to manage those effectively without having some intelligence added to them.
Yeah. So the big question that I want to know, in fact, when I was at the Juniper booth, one of their execs told me that when you look at justification for telco modernization, almost all their deals revolve around cost reduction, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of the coin where we talk about all these extra revenue generating services telcos will be able to and need to create. What I can't figure out is what those are, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was on the Cube with Chris Lewis and Dave Vellante, and Chris had mentioned that there's no new money coming into telco, but there is, right? It's just not going to the telco, and we kind of bandied about some ideas. So I don't think we know this yet, right? Like, how do telcos monetize their network investment?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And for most of the talk track around 5G, it's been they're going to monetize it with enterprises. So you've also saw a lot of announcements this year at Mobile World Congress, MWC, around organizations building out the templates and reference architectures for the use cases for the enterprise, for certain industries, right, on a by industry basis, and looking for those enterprises to consume 5G as a private network. So is that necessarily going to capture the same amount of revenue as like a Netflix or others, right? Probably not. But it's a lot more than they were getting probably with the 4G, right? The deployments and rollout. So I expect to see the telcos start to look at really making a serious effort towards monetizing this with private deployments, leveraging partners, right? Like Cisco, et cetera, others, HPE, right? Athonet that they just purchased, right? So things like that where they're looking to drive that continuity between the enterprise and also the capabilities of the 5G network.
Yeah, the other aspect of this too is, and we've theorized about this for a while, is you can make the network code, right? Have exposed APIs. People might build apps on top of it. And the one of the more interesting announcements, and I chuckle at it because a lot of people chuckled at it, was the GSMA's announcement about the Open API consortium, if you want to call it that, or standard or whatever, where they made eight APIs available. Most people that I talked to kind of, rolled their eyes at that, and it didn't really think the GSMA was the right standards body to do that. My concern, though, if it's not done by a body like that for telco, then it's just going to be the app providers, the AWSs and Microsofts and VMwares and stuff, that actually wind up releasing the APIs and making the money. So do you think what the Open API initiative actually will have some legs?
I certainly hope it does, because I think that's something that can really help drive organizations to help monetize those environments. I mean, this is something I've seen. I used to go down to the Verizon labs here, 5G labs in Boston, and they were talking about the ecosystem and the partner and the software ecosystem back then. And in fact, that's why they ended up buying Blue Jeans, right? That was part of that ecosystem that they wanted to bring in.
But they don't sell Blue Jeans. They sell more WebEx, Ring Central, and Teams than they do Blue Jeans, right?
Correct. I think that the key, though, is just the fact that they're thinking about how to open this up and how to drive that innovation and drive more applications on top of the environment that add value to these organizations and to these environments. So I think, from my standpoint, anything that's trying to drive innovation is a good thing, whether it belongs with the GSMA or it needs to move to something, closer to GitHub and things like, what I mean? Something like that, something more open source. I think that remains to be seen, but it's at least a start. And now organizations will figure out where it actually lands.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think what we're saying is uh, we believe telco transformation is happening slowly. We just don't know exactly how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, or how they're going to make money off it in the back end.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more. Yeah, as the year rolls on, as time moves on,
Yeah.
we will see how they end up monetizing it. But I think we're, like I said, 5G is still in its relative infancy. We're
Yeah.
still seeing a lot of the cases used out, countries still getting spectrum, et cetera. So there's still time to figure it out. But like I said, I mean, I think we're going to see more and more as time transpires and as these announcements come to fruition, and we see how effective it is to leverage a cloud, right, and a public cloud infrastructure to host a 5G environment and so forth.
I do think one of the things that's important, like for the reason why I think the AWS type of announcement is important is because I don't, well, I know the telcos themselves don't have a ton of cloud skills either,
Correct.
right? So as you make that shift, there's an awful lot of skills that are required to make that shift. But I also don't know if the telcos really want to turn over the operations of their core to AWS lock, stock, and barrel either, right? So there's a double-edged sword there. You can do it faster if you do that, but certainly there's some risk. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you had made the comment earlier about reducing costs, but I think really what availability is kind of important for a telco,
yeah,
and ensuring that it's always up, always running. And then the other big piece is it's also going to be what kind of experience does that deliver for those end users as well, right? Because that's another key component. Consumers in particular have choice; they can move pretty quickly. Enterprises probably won't be so have that same level of agility when it comes to the private networks, though.
yeah. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, and it was kind of interesting who I ran into at Mobile World Congress, is that, and the theme is really the coming together of enterprise and telco network, and certainly this growth in digitization, digital experiences will lead to it. But for instance, I had lunch with Jeetu Patel, who runs security and collaboration at Cisco. He said he doesn't really normally come to the show, but he was doing a keynote with Mercedes, right? Talking about the connected car experience. And then Nabil Bukhari, who's the CTO of Extreme Networks, was there as well. Again, same comment, not really a regular stop for him, but he was doing in his keynote a session on digital twins, right? And they've been very active with digital twins. And so there was a lot of metaverse there as well, which a lot of people think it was a network-based application. And so how heavily do you think what's going on in enterprise is actually influencing the rest of networking?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think certainly if 5G is going to be monetized in the enterprise, then I would expect to see a lot more of the use cases and so forth being driven from that enterprise and coming forward. So
from the enterprise out versus the other way, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's really, this is just a simple case of what do your customers want, right? So, and what do they need? And so I think from that perspective, like you talked about the connected car, I thought that was really cool. It did kind of scare the crap out of me that people are going to have WebExes on their car. It's bad enough with people driving and talking on the phone, and now they're going to have WebExes. But I get the idea of innovation, right? And it's how can you deploy this technology? Where can you deploy it to make organizations, to make employees more productive and more effective? As long as there's a you must be parked in order to use WebEx, I think I'm okay with it. But I think we're going to see a lot more of this interaction and interconnection between the enterprise and with the telco enterprise, right? With the telco solutions, especially around 5G. It's interesting you made the comment about, hey, the telcos really don't have experience in the cloud. The opposite of that is that the enterprises really don't have a lot of experience in telco networks either.
Yes.
And so there's got to be a mixing. That's why I think the partnerships are going to be really important. And so when you see the telcos partnered with the HPEs and Cisco's and VMware's, Junipers, right? Potentially even, Extreme getting into this, I think that's really going to help because there's got to be some type of a translation that takes place and how these pieces fit together and how they're able to deploy them. So initially, just like that AWS is helping with managed services, I would expect in a lot of cases for those organizations that don't already have those private networks, those private telco networks, to look for partners to help accelerate that transition, get them up to speed, get them trained on it, and then even integrate the two as well, right? So how do I, if I've got my corporate network, how do I make my private 5G part of that corporate network so I can have that visibility and to a certain degree control over that environment as well?
Yeah, and Nabil's session on digital twin, I find that topic fascinating because, historically, network operators didn't really have a practice network, right? Like you put things in and you committed to change, and then a third of the time,
Visio diagram, right? That was their practice network.
But a third of the time, like a third of network downtime is related to human error. In theory, with digital twin technology, you should never actually commit a change to your network unless it's been fully validated. And digital twins let you do that. And so, prior, to a couple of years ago, digital twin had been used in manufacturing and things like that. I had never heard of it being used as an enterprise IT tool. Today, it's becoming more and more commonplace. And the question is, though, in fact, I did a webinar with Keynote, the testing company, and they can actually create a digital twin of an entire point of sale network. And so if you do an upgrade to your POS, I think they did that with Staples. We did a webinar on that. You can simulate the whole amount. The question, though, is how far does that extend, right? As we talked about, all these networks are coming together. And so, where's the delineation point? Where does it end? How far into the telco cloud do you go? Is it becoming over the top thing? Like Thousand Eyes looking at internet traffic. Does you model that out? Like where how does this grow from here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and how one get access, and maybe those APIs opening up as a hint at how organizations can potentially leverage that, based on what information they'll actually be able to extract. But I mean, it's clear as that organizations have much more distributed environments, right? Applications are across multiple data centers, multiple public clouds, edge environments. The workers are all distributed as well. That the end-to-end visibility is hugely important. And not only is that getting all that end-to-end visibility, but like you said, from a planning perspective, with all the add moves changes that take place in an enterprise network, it's really critical to be able to ensure that when you're making a change, that it doesn't inadvertently break something else. And so we all know that the old method doesn't work, right? Because as soon as you finish that Visio diagram, about an hour later it changes and no one goes back and updates it. And so the need for these digital twins, Extreme's coming out with it, Forward Networks, there's a few others, I think NetBrain leverages it as well, starting to see it creep into the networking space. And it makes a lot of sense to be able to go out, to be able to collect that information, be able to show in real time what's connected, right? In a lot of cases, we know just knowing what's connected is really the most important part, right? So a lot of people just have no idea what's connected to their network in its entirety. So having these solutions that can go out, find out what's there, determine where the vulnerabilities are, be able to address those, be able to address any add moves changes that are going to be made ahead of time in a virtual digital environment prior to actually implementing them. I think that makes a lot of sense moving forward when, again, you want to be agile, you want to be able to move, but you really can't afford to be down. You need that level of availability.
Yeah. Okay. And that's good. I do think we'll see more and more enterprise telco convergence. And I think that there's nothing but make the environment even more complex. So we'll see how this, although digital twins will simplify it. So, I guess we'll see where this winds up. The third topic, and you've mentioned this several times, is just, I think 5G is actually real this time. It's something that has been sort of pie in the sky, and we've talked about it for a long time. I think people finally understand it's not going to globally displace Wi-Fi. And one of the things I thought that was missing from 5G was use cases, right? It's hard to envision what you're going to do with 5G outside of traditional LTE base, right, of manufacturing mining, unless you actually see it. And I thought there was a lot of good demos. For instance, at the VMware booth, they had a Tesla that was kitted out as a police car. And actually, from what I understand from Sanjay Upal, the GM of the Certified Business Unit, that is an actual model of a car that's actually being used in the UK now for police work, where it had on an edge server, it was running VMware's Telco cloud software, and then it had a 5G connection where it could do real-time license plate, like scanning and things like that for the police force. AWS had an entire demo area dedicated to a lot of 5G use cases. So they had this it was a little silly. It was like a bunch of Pokemon, characters,
Yeah.
but it was a pick and pack, right? That you could actually see, it would recognize that this is Pikachu and it would throw it in this bin, and it was Pokemon, it would throw it in this bin. And Verizon at their booth, they had something similar, but they were looking at quality metrics, and so they had some paper cups. Some were crumpled, it wasn't. And if it was crumpled, it would throw it away. Verizon actually demoed. They talked about what they did with the NFL this year, where one of the features of 5G is micro slicing. So they actually created a slice of the network for NFL coaches to use, right? Because that was dedicated bandwidth for the headsets and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. Salona had some demos there. They're working with the Cleveland Browns, and HB acquired Ethernet and stuff. So it appears that all this chatter about 5G over the last couple of years, it's kind of here now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective. As I've said in the past a little bit, 5G has been highly aspirational. Certainly, when people are responding to surveys and so forth, they're really eager to adopt it. They're not sure what they want to adopt it for, but they know it's going to make their life better. But I think you're right. We've been talking about it for a number of years. The pieces have been put in place. I mean, and what organizations need to realize, when you're building out a high capacity wireless network, the first thing that has to happen is fiber needs to be laid into the ground to do all the backhaul, right? So there's a lot of steps that have to take place in order for organizations to do a major step function upgrade on a telecommunications network. And so all that groundwork has been laid. That's all been done. The antennas are rolling out. The spectrum's been bought. A lot of the initial testing has been done. And, I think what we're now starting to see is that organizations are really starting to adopt it in earnest and really test out what those use cases are. And so, like I said, from the reference architectures that Cisco's putting out to other organizations I've talked to that are really highly focused on specific use cases. Like I said, there are some that are the no-brainer ones, the ones where 4G has already been used, but a lot of like transport as well, the transportation hub, so shipping, airports, things like that, just because there's so much more data, right? Those use cases of the airplanes collecting data as they fly, and when they land, being able to transmit it back. So before they don't have to wait till they get to the gate, so that if there's a part that it needs, it's waiting for them, right? So they can operate more efficiently.
There's way too much metal there for even outdoor Wi-Fi to work properly, right?
Yeah, there's so many different, and also sometimes just the sheer distance as well, being right, depending on the size of the airport and where you are and things like that. But shipping docks, containers, systems, things like that. If you want to break it down even further, potentially even in warehouses, you hear that as well in retail, where organizations are trying to use robotics and so forth, and you just can't afford any dead spots, things like that. So it usually, what usually comes down to when they're trying to talk about the trade-off between Wi-Fi and 5G, that coverage, it could be more and more the latency as the standalone systems get deployed, right? In private deployments, it allows for those network slicing. I think that's where it starts opening up, right? You start seeing some of the security benefits as well as the performance benefits. So it's just, I hate to say it's just a matter of time, but essentially that's what we're starting to see is that these 5G rollouts are starting to happen in earnest. Like I said, lots of companies, Salona, the Athernet, et cetera, others that are out there that are helping the Ciscos, et cetera, Dell, right? All these organizations that are coming together to help drive this ecosystem around 5G and private 5G and be able to roll that out, I think is really starting to take place. And like I said, we've seen it in the stadiums, right? Initially, right? Where they really need to be able to support that capacity, right? The high volume.
Yeah. And I am hopeful that we see, continued use cases. I think that's, that's the big challenge. And as you mentioned, I've done my own surveys on it where I think the last data point I saw from even another research firm was 95% of businesses plan to deploy both Wi-Fi and 5G. But then when you ask them, what are you going to use it for? They're scratching their heads and they're not really sure, right? So the more use cases we see, the better it is for it. I do think it is different than 4G, just this obviously the speeds, you're breaking the gig barrier in some cases.
Yeah.
But I also think that I think you're right. I think that the other 5G alone isn't enough to drive kind of usage, right? But we have the fiber in the ground. There's more kind of video, like all most of the use cases that I saw at Mobile World Congress were video based, right? So now there's a lot more real-time video analytics. What was interesting too, Bob, is that all the use cases, there was an associated edge computing server, like all the AWS ones had a Snowball there, and VMware talked about having an edge server in the car. So I think without edge computing, I'm not fully convinced 5G alone would see any more adoption, and maybe we're hitting a bit of a perfect storm here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things, right? People are deploying a lot more sensors. So from a capacity standpoint, having a network that can, not that IoT sensors generate a ton of data, but when you've got a ton of sensors, it still generates a lot of data. So and then if you've got all that data being generated there, the last thing you want to do is ship it back and have it take a lot of time to get processed. So that edge computing is absolutely taking place. So it is a little bit of a perfect storm, and that's why you've heard the telcos talk about MEC, when you're thinking about how are they going to monetize it, we talked about earlier. I mean, that might be a great example. Like if they can open up their environment that they have and allow organizations to deploy compute on their edge environments, that's another potential way to monetize it. But you're right, it's that perfect storm of there's a lot going on at the edge. They need more comprehensive, solutions. One of them, one of the big ones that I hear all the time is around push to talk. So for safety. So a lot of these environments that need to have a network that can cover acres, but enable a push to talk environment to secure safety and do some geofencing and things like that. So, and that also needs the compute there to be able to analyze where they are in relationship to something they shouldn't be, right? If they need to warn them for a safety factor. So I think we're definitely starting to see that. I agree with you. The video, first of all, video always is just kind of sexy, right? When you're at a show and you can see the different augmented reality and that kind of stuff going on.
Well, that's why we're on video.
That's right. We're on, because people just want to see us, right? I'm sure. Can we get some augmented stuff going on here? I think there's a lot of different use cases that are emerging. Organizations, I think we're going to see over this year in particular, we're going to see a lot more private 5G deployments. We're going to see how that then mixes with the corporate network and how the organizations build out their skill sets around deploying that, or whether they'll consume it as, fully managed service. The only thing I'll say about that is that organizations, enterprises that want to deploy this, they want to make sure they own and control the data. So while they might have it as a managed service, they want to make sure they're in control of all that data. Right?
Actually, it's interesting you brought up the integration of the enterprise network. That's one thing that David Coleman and I from Extreme talked about, was how do you integrate it into IT systems? Because historically, Wi-Fi was an overlay network, and then we had to integrate that into the network management systems. We can't, if we have 5G come out and become another kind of overlay network, that will slow down adoption. And so, does it become a feature of Wi-Fi? I think that's, kind of HP's point. I think most of the network vendors would have to own the technology, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Right now we've got a lot of organizations that are pushing towards unified wired, wireless, and WAN. And now we need to, do we need to start thinking about unified wired, wireless, WAN, and wireless WAN? Or something, you know what I mean? Like, is there another, does that take on another function that organizations need to think about? Because with each of these technologies, as they've emerged, they've slowly become unified and brought into the fold. So you can have this, simplified management, or at least an attempt to have a simplified management over all of these networks and end to end. And so I do think that, and as we know, the technology usually comes out first, and then the management capacity comes in somewhat after that. And then the cultural changes come sometime after that. But I think that, like I said, I've definitely seen much more interest in private 5G deployments this year. The spectrum's all been allocated. The solutions and the partners are all, you're seeing the ecosystems form of all the partnerships with the companies coming together. And I think now they're ready in earnest to go out and start deploying these solutions at the enterprise locations. And I think what we'll be seeing this year is more and more organizations reporting the benefits that they've seen, whether it be through performance, security, availability, et cetera. And then towards the end of the year, we'll probably start hearing about, okay, well, how are we effectively managing this, and how are we thinking about managing, and are we going to start merging some of the management capabilities?
Yeah, good. Oh, and I want to point, it wasn't David Coleman, it was Masoom Moore from Cisco. He and I were talking the integration. But I think, that wraps up the ZKast. But the three themes I think we'll see again next year, coming together: the telco transformation and continued migration to the cloud. Obviously, I don't expect this to be done in a year. Probably 10 years we'll still be talking about it, right? So they come together with enterprise and telco, and I think the enterpriseation of MWC. It'll be interesting to see if other more enterprise-focused vendors continue to show up there, right? That I think is probably good for the show. And the third one is the growth of 5G. Although I did hear there was a 6G demo at MWC this year, so so we'll be talking about that. And I do think, just on a side note, I think the way Comcast is using the term 10G is just doing the entire industry a disservice, because it's just confusing people as to what it is. So I guess if I have 5G and Wi-Fi 6, that's 11G maybe, I don't know.
When then you get Wi-Fi 7 and
yeah. All right, Bob, that's good. Hopefully I'll see everybody there next year, Barcelona in 2024. But on behalf of Bob Laliberte from Enterprise Strategy Group, I'm Zias Caravella. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on another ZKast. Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thanks.